After the war with Iran, the United States of America focused all its attention on Russia's war against Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin needs to stop playing games and finally reach a peace agreement. Such a statement was made today by the American President Donald Trump immediately after meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the G7 summit. In addition, Trump admitted for the first time that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is now in a weaker position regarding the war in Ukraine. And he added that he is preparing to reinstate all oil sanctions against Russia that were lifted amid the war in the Middle East. Zelensky showed Trump a photo of the destroyed Kyiv-Pechursk-Lavra after a Russian drone strike and described the real situation at the front, suggesting Russia will face a hard winter if Putin doesn't agree to end the war and come to the negotiating table before winter. If Vladimir Putin does not agree to end the war and sit down at the negotiating table before winter. Zelensky proposed to Trump a format for a meeting with Putin that the Kremlin dictator would find difficult to refuse, especially if Donald Trump insists on it. Zelensky and Trump shouldn't just fly to Moscow. And today, European officials have already hinted that this summer they will try to get the Russian dictator out of his bunker for real negotiations. So, let's sum up the initial results of the meeting between Donald Trump and Zelensky on the sidelines of the G7 summit in France. My name is Alex Hipechi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in the description of this video. So the meeting between the presidents of Ukraine and the United States, Zelensky and Trump, will indeed take place. The meeting will take place on the sidelines of the G7 summit in France, although some Western media previously reported that such a meeting would not happen, and the results of the meeting already say a lot. But I'll start this episode with a short video that can explain a lot, and many people missed this video. But it shows how much the communication of American officials with Zelensky differs behind the scenes and in public. In the video when Trump enters the G7 summit, you can clearly see behind him Zelensky and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio shaking hands and hugging each other quite firmly. Now, let's get to the point. Marco Rubio is hugging tightly. At the G7 summit, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is hugging. Trump enters the video. Trump at the G7 summit, US Secretary of State at the G7 Secretary of State Trump and the Secretary of State shake hands. US Secretary of State Marco shakes hands. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. In the video, when Trump and the Secretary of State shake hands, they hug tightly. He attends the G7 summit hugs, appears with Secretary Rubio and Trump. Rubio and Trump shake hands. And during a meeting with Trump, he discussed strengthening Ukraine's air defense. In particular, they personally discussed the idea of granting Ukraine an American license to produce American air defense systems, such as Patriot and the missiles for them. Separately, at the summit, they discussed Ukraine's preparations for the next heating season. And here Zelensky said that the old bald man Vladimir Putin needs to be urgently pulled out of his bunker and brought to negotiations, and this should be done before winter. He says this is important for both Ukraine and Russia. Zelensky also said that he discussed with Trump the possibility of organizing a meeting with the Russian dictator in the United States of America in a certain format. He said that this would be Donald Trump's personal initiative, and if Putin gets scared again and locks himself in his bunker once more, then the United States should finally take a stand as well. It's obvious that he, meaning the bald mishap Vladimir Putin, simply doesn't want to end this war. Besides, Zelensky reminded that he had offered Vladimir Putin to meet anywhere at any time, except of course that filthy Moscow. Nobody is interested in it. They even discussed the format of a meeting with Putin at the G7 summit with the participation of all democratic countries. But Putin got scared again. His spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said that supposedly nothing was offered to Putin and once again stated that Zelensky should come to Moscow. Since the old bald man Vladimir Putin is really in bad shape and his knees start to shake whenever he hears that he needs to get out of the bunker and go somewhere out in the world. And after today's talks with Zelensky in France, Trump admitted that Putin is now in a weaker position and called on him to finally make a deal. Well, first of all, Trump stated that after the end of the war with Iran, the focus of the United States shifted to achieving peace between Ukraine and Russia. According to Trump, on June 14, he had very good phone conversations with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. After that, he stated, quote, "It seems to me that we might be able to do something regarding achieving peace. We really can. I think they are both open to it. Now that the war with Iran is over, we will focus on this and see if we can bring it to a conclusion." And later, Trump said that Putin should stop playing games. And then another quote. "Listen, Russia needs to make a deal. Russia has lost a huge number of people, just like Ukraine. Last month, they lost 35,000 soldiers. What's happening there is just madness. They keep fighting and losing soldiers. There is strong animosity between Zelensky and Putin." And after the meeting between Trump and Zelensky, Deutsche Welle journalist Michaela Kefner, who is now at the summit, reported that the US president acknowledged that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is now in a weaker position regarding the war in Ukraine. Here is her quote. Trump listened to Zelensky and the European leaders and acknowledged that during the discussion of the situation in Ukraine at the G7 summit, Putin is now in a weaker position than before. Trump also stated that the US plans to resume oil sanctions against Russia soon. Since the situation with oil supplies is improving due to the agreement between the US and Iran, therefore Russian oil is no longer needed in such large volumes on the global market. And let me remind you that back in March, the US actually suspended part of the sanctions against Russia. It was about allowing the export of already loaded Russian oil and petroleum products. Washington justified this step by saying that because of the war against Iran, the Hormuz Strait was blocked, which significantly complicated the situation with oil supplies from Middle Eastern countries. Today, Trump says that the situation has changed, so basically Russian oil is no longer needed on the world market in such volumes. It can be blocked again. And today, Zelensky met with many European leaders and others on the sidelines of the G7 summit. For example, the leader of Canada and the leader of the US were there. And it's obvious that the very idea of negotiations with the Russians is being discussed, with European participation. And now, the German Foreign Minister Johann Wadefull stated that peace talks to end the war in Ukraine could begin as early as this summer, since the war has essentially reached a stalemate. But it's also important to remember that during a phone conversation with Vladimir Putin on June 14, Trump promised the Russian dictator that he would put pressure on Zelensky and Europe, and is also sending his envoys to Moscow again, Witkoff and Kushner. And today in Moscow, Putin's aide Ushakov has already stated that he hopes Trump's envoys will arrive in Moscow on Friday after the signing of the agreement between the US and Iran in Geneva. Well, after they've been brainwashed by the Russians, Trump usually drastically changes his rhetoric. So we can only hope that Europe will still manage to persuade Donald Trump. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would appreciate it. You can do this with any donation using the links and payment details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone. Subtitles provided by Simon.